What do you get when you cross a know-it-all newspaper columnist with an awkward, unsophisticated everyman?
Yeah. Well, I'm just not sure about that right now.
Welcome to Couch and the Rube.
Welcome to Couch in the Rube, our Wednesday night show brought to you by our friends at Front 43 Neighborhood Pub and Cask & Company Kitchen and Bar. That's just north of Frandor on East Saginaw near the Lansing-East Lansing border. Unbelievable place for a date night, for a drink after work, and to watch a game. The setup there is fantastic. Had a meal there, had a good lunch there over the weekend with an old friend, and was glad to show the place to him, and had my favorite Big Island bowl. It's like a sushi bowl. It's incredible. You feel decent afterwards. And speaking of Maui, man, some issues over there.
What?
Have you seen the fires in Maui?
I didn't know that's where we were going.
It wasn't the plan thing. I just thought about it when I talked about the Big Island bowl.
Yeah, that sucks, man. I did see that there's some strong fires over there in Maui.
It's in Lahaina. It's right where the Maui Invitational is. And the Michigan State's supposed to be there a year from now. I wonder if, things will probably be rebuilt to some degree by then, but this is going to affect things for a long time. It looks pretty scary. Yeah.
What's up with these fires all of a sudden?
Not good.
We can't contain. Canada, Hawaii.
Yeah.
Is the world ending?
The weather is changing. Yes, no doubt. This is a global warming. Now, not every specific instance is global warming, but the frequency is without question something there, certainly above our pay grade on and how to solve it here. That's not how I plan to get into this. God, I suck.
How
at
about
this.
those Maui wildfires, Jason? How are you?
We're like 5 years into this, and I still suck.
Actually, you're fine at it. You just get a little hard on yourself sometimes.
Okay,
it's hard to host a show, man. Believe me.
Okay,
it's fine. You do fine. You do great.
We've got what I think is going to be a good show today. There are a couple. We're going to talk some MSU football here off the top, and then
we're going to talk to Woody Harrelson, who lost his house in Maui.
Yeah, then we're going to talk to Scott Dockerman from The Athletic. He doesn't just cover Iowa; he covers the Big Ten and has the pulse of like scheduling and how expansion may affect things. And I want to have a discussion with him on where this is going, because he's somebody I always enjoy talking Big Ten football with, and I think that could be good. And then Mike Vorel from the Seattle Times covers the Washington Huskies, and I was listening to one of his Twitter Spaces the other day with James Crapia, who covers Oregon. It's really good and really interesting, and I think I want to get the perspective of what people out there think. Like if you're a Washington fan, or you're in that athletic department, or sort of the carnage of the Pac-12, what the mood is out there after all of this.
It's got to be brutal.
It's not. Well, they were.
It's no more.
They were sort of saved. I think the Huskies in Oregon, Washington and Oregon, probably feel okay-ish. Some people probably don't like it, but it's better to be them than other people now.
But here's my question, though: the non-revenue sports, they're going to adhere to these leagues now. Like you have to go and travel.
Yeah.
West Coast.
Yeah.
Come on.
That
can't be true, right?
It's true. They're going to be part of the Big Ten. They're going to have to figure it out, and there will be some creative scheduling. And some of it is the money one of the things these leagues are going to have to do is, by taking the money, so to speak, you then have to make the student-athlete experience decent. So what that means is, when you're going to have to make sure your softball team is able to charter out west. That's the money. You've got the money to do it now. You need to make sure.
Yeah, but not for that. The money's not supposed to go to that.
If that softball team is flying commercial on a red eye
Spirit,
then everybody at your administration should be fired. President on down, who signed up for this. You do not. You got to make sure these people are taken care of. You signed up for this bullshit, so you better do it right and make sure they're all right. What was interesting today is Gene Smith, the outgoing athletic director at Ohio State, who's going to retire a year from now. He said that Fox brought extra money to the table. So he made, none of the Big Ten schools are losing money by losing a slice of the pie to Oregon and Washington. And Ross Dellinger and others basically said that, had the Big Ten not given the extra cash, they weren't going to. They've been given the extra cash. They weren't going to take them. And that's what made the Pac-12 fall apart. So this is Fox and the Big Ten together destroying the Pac-12. And again, the Pac-12 has had poor leadership for a long time. They deserve absolutely some of the blame for this. But Michigan State will not lose money because Oregon and Washington are coming in, which I think is a good thing for MSU and other universities.
So the teams, like the 5 teams that are left in the Pac-12, do they just join the Mountain West? Because Mountain West teams can't join anywhere because they have to pay $35 million, right? So
I think
where do those teams go?
Well, I think some of them may wind up in the ACC. Like you may see, it sounds like that's where Stanford and Cal are headed, and I think you're going to see with Washington State and Oregon State, it's probably like the Mountain West, which sucks. And they're saying what you're hearing from their presidents is they'll still spend at a high major level. So we'll get into those discussions with Mike and Scott here in a little bit. And a couple things I want to get into. One, you watched this Johnny Manziel documentary.
I did. I did. I got to say, if you don't want any spoilers,
no spoilers.
Mute it out. I'm not going to give – well, it's tough to talk about without giving something away, but
okay.
It opens with him.
Does he make it in the NFL?
Yeah. 5 years. No. They show all of the disaster and all of the trials and tribulations that he went through, and it was pretty wild to watch. But it opens with him speaking at some Texas A&M kind of thing, and he sounds all cordial and nice. And like the next scene, it's just like, man, I didn't give a fuck. It's like, oh, it's Johnny Manziel. He's the same dude. He's still a douche. I mean, believe me, when Manziel went into Alabama and beat them, it was fucking awesome. Johnny football was a badass time. It was great to be great time to be alive. But as you see him jump into the pros, he never looked at a playbook.
Yeah, wild. You know who doesn't make it in the pros? The bros. It's like you can see those guys, and I don't want to.
Well, there's some bros that make it. They're just
not as much. Yeah, well, I'm talking about the quarterbacks.
Yeah.
There's a point where your talent doesn't take you any further. You got to have a lot more than talent.
And here's the other question: it's like it's been only 10 years. I mean, do we need a documentary already on Johnny football? I mean, I thought those things are like 15, 20-year kind of things, and so you have more. I don't know. It just seemed like a lot of the stuff was made up to make a documentary look interesting.
So is it a recommendation that we watch it or not?
If you want a hate watch, I would watch it. If you're looking for you'll end up getting pissed off if you don't like Johnny Manziel. But it's football. Any documentary about sports I can watch.
Okay.
But if you have other stuff to watch and you don't want to hate Johnny Manziel, it's like, all right.
There you had it. New Girl, Shrinking, Love Actually. There are other recommendations if you don't want to watch the Johnny Manziel.
What was the boat one? What's that show? That TV show with a boat, Below Deck?
Below Deck Mediterranean, especially. Yeah, no, Below Deck is a like if you're going to watch what we in our house call garbage, but enjoyable garbage. You know what I mean? Like it's shows that we know we're ashamed of in the moment, but we kind of just need some light viewing. You know,
I like watching Dog the Bounty Hunter. You know, I have those shows.
Yeah, we have these things where it's like, we want to watch something in the 15 minutes we have to eat dinner right now.
Right.
Let's throw on. What are we going to watch? Below Deck, and then we'll look up and it's like 45 minutes later and we're still watching. So
I'm surprised your wife likes that show.
Yeah, she does.
Doesn't she find those people just like so annoying?
Nah, she likes some of them. She gets into some of the shows she watches. She won't let me be around because she's ashamed.
Yeah, but see, like people rip on the Kardashians, but I swear if you tune in, you're mesmerized for at least 10 minutes. You may not watch the hour, but you're going to be mesmerized for a little bit. I have caught myself. Not recently, but I have caught myself if I flip through the channels and leave it on, I'm like, and then 10 minutes later, I'm like, holy shit, what am I doing?
We all need to turn our brains off sometimes, and that's what those shows will let you do.
Yeah.
So the other thing I want to talk about today before we get to our two guests, since we last did a podcast, but a couple Michigan State football availabilities, including on Wednesday, and we're doing this Wednesday night, with Scotty Hazelton and several of the defensive linemen. And what's really interesting about what we're hearing from these guys and what we're hearing from Hazelton, and they are almost giddy about their depth. It stands out. And if they were just trying to blow smoke and speak bullshit into existence, it wouldn't sound like this. first of all, you don't want to set yourself up for failure. If you really didn't have good quality depth, you wouldn't talk about this. But they're especially excited about the guys up front, the defensive linemen in the middle, some of the transfers they have, the size that they have. And some of the guys who played last year have been talking about how, they only had, you talk to Simeon Barrow and Derek Harmon, and they'll talk about how they couldn't give everything they had because they knew there were only 3 of them in the rotation last year. So it was like you couldn't play 100% every snap. You had to survive, 60 snaps a game or whatever it was. Not that many, but you had to survive too many. It was an unhealthy amount of snaps to play at your highest level all the time. What I am finding interesting, and they love Jalen Sammy, the Colorado transfer. They're big into him. I think this is going to be a certainly. I don't know if they have anybody who's elite other than Barrow. Seems to be a guy who's close to that when he's at his best. But they seem to have the depth, as Hazelton said today, for guys to have a chance to be elite or be guys who cause the offense problems because they're not relied on to be on the field all the time. And when they're out there, they can give everything. The thing that I am taking away from everything I've heard, Jason, is I don't know if they have the difference makers yet to be a defense that causes problems week in and week out. But it sounds like they think they have the depth not to be a sieve anymore. Like, the amount of first downs they're giving up is ridiculous. The amount of, when Michigan State wins, it's usually their defense hung on. That needs to end at some point, and I think it is fair to expect, based on the depth, they talk about the guys they've recruited, who they think they have, especially up front defensively, that the defense won't be the reason they lose. It may not yet be the Mark D'Antonio peak era guys where you could win with your defense, but it should be at least enough to hold its own, at least enough to have some strengths to take things away from offenses. And when we talk about the over-unders for season wins and all that sort of stuff, that's something MSU's defense really hasn't had. Even in 2021, when they were an opportunistic defense and did some things well, they did not have great depth. This should be the best defense they've had based on who they have and the depth they think they have. And if that's the case, that's another, if you're looking for reasons for hope, there it is.
But they need to stay healthy, because that's been the issue lately, is injuries, and that's why you have a lack of depth. By the way, is it keep chopping still, or is there a new mantra for the season?
I haven't heard keep chopping once, to be honest with you.
Okay, so that's over. Are they going to bring out a new one? Or
so when you go 5-7, do you lose whatever your mantras were? Is that the thing?
I think you do. I think you have to retire it. But it was keep chopping for a couple years.
Was it keep chopping when they were 2-5? Though I feel like we just haven't heard it. You're right. Maybe that's my hope for the neon uniforms, that things go so badly when they're wearing them, they retire and they keep trotting them out.
They're awesome.
Yeah. No, that stood out to me. The other thing that stood out was Jay Johnson on Monday, and just sort of reading the tea leaves, and I wrote a column about this. I have no idea where the quarterback battle will go throughout the year once it's sort of live under fire and those guys have to play, tough competition, and we can all see what's happening on the field, and Noah Kim may or may not be the guy, but I will be stunned if he's not the starter.
Speaking of Johnny Manziel, I was watching that last night, and he came out of nowhere. You really didn't have anybody looking at him, and Johnny Manziel came out of nowhere. Why can't Noah Kim? I mean, why not?
Well, right, no, and the other thing is just the recent history of Michigan State football is the more heralded guy hasn't won the job.
I know.
Ryan Van Dyke, we've talked about this, Keith Nickel, Andrew Maxwell was, more heralded than Connor Cook. The guy who has become the guy has rarely been the guy. And that doesn't mean, you know what I mean. I'm trying to sound clever, but I still suck at this. So, yeah, again, we will find out a lot about Noah Kim once the season starts, because some guys are gamers. You know who was never a great practice quarterback? Connor Cook. But he was a gamer, and at his best, he was a really, really good college quarterback. And I'm not saying that the younger quarterbacks aren't, are waiting for the games, but some guys are just better on game day, and some guys are less than. And Andrew Maxwell had a really good fall camp from all reports in 2013, and that wasn't very good in the games, So sometimes the controlled scrimmage element of things goes away, and, things could absolutely change. But I would be surprised if Noah Kim is not under center on
I have a mantra for Michigan State this year, and I'm going to take it from Johnny Manziel last night. He said, win or lose, we booze.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the formula to get to 9-3.
I mean, listen, they're going to sell beer this year. Why not? Be a good mantra.
Are they? They're not
If you're
selling
losing,
beer
you
this
can
year,
sell.
are they?
Are they not?
They're allowed to sell beer in the. I don't think they're going to have that in the stadium yet this year. Yeah, apologize.
Oh.
All right, let's take a really quick break. When we come back, we'll have Scott Dockerman and we'll talk some Big Ten expansion and scheduling and what the future may hold. Couch in the Rube, our Wednesday night show presented by Front 43 and Cask & Company.
Where else can you cheer on your team? Enjoy a mouth-watering burger or savory sushi. Sip on handcrafted cocktails or one of 46 beers on tap. Take your game day or date night to Cask & Company Kitchen Bar or Front 43 Neighborhood Pub near Frandor. 2 amazing places with 1 awesome blended modern American Asian menu. Catch the game on one of 30 60-inch TVs or stop in for the all-you-can-eat lunch buffet. Enjoy happy hour or elevate your night out at Cask & Company or Front 43 on East Saginaw in Lansing. If you're looking forward to cool summer nights at the lake or backyard gatherings, make Muskox's spring and summer flannel collection part of your summer experience. Muskox's lighter weight 3 seasons flannel is perfect for warmer weather without sacrificing Muskox's noted softness or high quality. Plus, Muskox donates 10% of every $100 purchased to the Alaska Wildlife Conservation Center. Visit GoMuskox.com to find the absolute best flannel for you and use our promo code CAWCAW15 for $15 off your flannel order. Trust us, you've never felt more comfortable than you will in a Muskox flannel. Firekeepers Online Casino and Sportsbook is the site to play. Get your Vegas on right now from your phone, tablet, or laptop. All the hottest slots and tables, plus sports betting featuring in-game wagering. Download the app at firekeeperscasino.com. Go with the name you know. Firekeepers. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older and located in Michigan. Gambling problem? Call the Michigan Problem Gambling Helpline at 1-800-270-7117.
Find Couch in the Rube podcasts on Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Google Podcasts, CastBox, and the Rube's favorite podcast addict.
Couch in the Rube, our Wednesday night show presented by our friends at Front 43 Neighborhood Pub and Cask & Company Kitchen and Bar near the Lansing-East Lansing border. Pleased now to be joined by my friend Scott Dockerman from The Athletic, covers Iowa football and the Big Ten and college football at large. Scott, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Graham. How's it going today?
I'm doing well. So some stuff's happened since we last talked, which was just not that long ago. It's almost like they should hold off on Big Ten Media Days if they're going to do that sort of stuff. So what was your initial reaction? Initial thought to the end of the Pac-12 and the addition of 2 more teams to get to 18, Washington and Oregon in the Big Ten?
You know, when it was going down, I kept thinking and hoping almost that there was just some way the Pac-12 could hold together. Because, you know, it's the old-fashioned part of me that still longs for those days in the 80s and 90s where there were kind of clearly defined leagues and there were 5 or 6 of them, and the Pac-12 and the Big Ten kind of had this partnership that's lasted for 75 or so years, and so you wanted them to hold together. And then when reality sat in and Washington and Oregon joined the Big Ten, you just kind of went, okay, how's this going to work? 18 teams, and I think in some ways it's actually going to make some of the West Coast travel a little bit better. Certainly will for USC and UCLA and most of those sports, because then they can hopefully play each other more often and then limit some of the travels east. But overall, it seems to be, you know, shedding the character that made college sports and the Big Ten unique, and I think that's kind of a shame.
Yeah, it's interesting because a year ago when they added UCLA and USC, while they don't necessarily fit the traditional Big Ten, it still felt more fun. It was like, all right, they've got bring in the LA schools, they got Rutgers, they got Maryland, DC. You know, this is fun. 16 is still a size that you can almost get your arms around and make it a league and a community. It's whatever. Maybe you're telling yourself stuff, but really that put in motion the end of the Pac-12 as well, because those were anchor schools in a lot of ways for the media rights money that would be needed, and so the things were in motion, and we just didn't realize it. One of the things you wrote that I thought was really good is because everybody's wondering now, what's the scheduling look like, especially in football, right? What do they break off into divisions again, which I don't think they want to do? Do you get 10 games? And in the short term, there's not going to be that many changes to the actual schedule, or don't need to be, from what was built for 2024 and 2025.
Yeah, it's all going to stay relatively the same, at least in the initial phases, which, there were 11 protected rivalries. They're not going to go away because I think everybody was kind of fearful or thought that, well, if you stay at 9 games, then you just have one protected rival and then you cycle through everybody else. But look at like Michigan State. You're never going to play Michigan every year again if that's the case, or an Iowa, Minnesota. That's never going to be played ever again. So I think they're still going to keep those. Those are woven into the fabric of the Big Ten, and I think it now makes sense for those 4 West Coast teams to all play one another and be protected, because then it limits their trips east and it limits the teams east from going west all the time. So I think that really will make sense if that's the case. It's going to limit and change the rotations, and there was a perfect rotation when it was 16 teams and they did this, to where everybody was going to play on every campus once every 4 years. That's not going to be the case anymore unless they go to 10 games, which is possible, but not for a while. There's just too many non-conference games out there, and you're going to be limiting your major opponents in your Power 5. But then again, you're wondering, should you even do that anyway? If you get a cross-country game or a game against an SEC team, you really want to keep it. Or if Michigan State plays Notre Dame or something like that, you want to keep those games. So I think what we'll see, and what I've been told, is they're just going to, the rotations are going to change. They're going to be a little longer, but overall, not much is going to change out of what they already previously determined.
For schools like Michigan, well, let's go here first. Does it stop at 18? And one thing I find interesting is if the ACC, winds up taking Stanford and Cal, that certainly seems like a landing place for them. But does it stay at 18 for any decent amount of time in your estimation?
That's a great guess. I'd love to say no. I'd love to say yes, but I don't think that's the case. I think the next step, and it might be a little bit of a time, it might be towards the end of the media rights deal, is what's going to happen with the ACC. We've heard a lot of saber rattling out of Florida State. I don't think they have really anywhere to go right now. Because ESPN owns the ACC network just like it owns the SEC network, and why would you take a major property out of one and put it in the other league when they really don't need it? And I think that they're just trying to get more money at this point. But when you get close to 2030, when the media rights deals come up again for the Big Ten, and that's when I think you're going to start to see a little bit more conversation about some of these schools, possibly in Notre Dame, but Clemson, North Carolina to me is probably the one that's going to garner maybe if there is going to be a fight between the SEC and Big Ten, it'd be over North Carolina. So I will say, try to predict that 18 seems to be the likely number for the next 5 to 6 years, but after that, who knows? It could be we could be off to the races.
It's going to make this isn't good for trying to make the playoff or be relevant, especially if you're not Ohio State. We've talked before about schools like Michigan State and Iowa and Wisconsin sort of fighting over the same kid and having a lot of similarities as like programs. For programs like that, adding Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, and I know Washington's just now gotten good and had a real stretch where they weren't very good, and UCLA's had a stretch where they weren't very good. But overall, just in terms of brands and quality of football, there's not a Cal or a Purdue in there. This didn't help a lot of the traditional Big Ten schools get to the playoff or become more relevant. And I know there's going to be more playoff spots, but if you got an 18-team league, you're still going to need to be at minimum in the top 4 and probably still often in the top 3 to have a shot in the playoff. Yeah,
and in the playoff, they're going to have to readjust the qualifications. Probably both the SEC and Big Ten would love that, because right now it's 6 and 6,
right.
But that was before the Pac-12 bit the dust. So I think you're looking at a minimum of 5, if not even 4 automatic qualifiers. My guess is it'll probably be 5 because a group of 5 conference, probably deservedly so,
Yeah.
to have a representation. But, you're going to have to, if you're in the Big Ten, you're going to have to strive to be at least in the top 3, and you muddy the water. As you mentioned, there's a really good middle class to the Big Ten, and there has been for generations. Michigan State, Wisconsin, Iowa. Occasionally there are other teams that jump up there. Northwestern, Purdue has on occasion, and I think Washington and Oregon fit that middle class really well, and will be very competitive. I think USC is probably more in the line of Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. UCLA, I'm kind of getting the feeling that they're more like Maryland. A lot of potential. They're going to be great in a lot of sports. Football, it's going to take them some time before they can actually be competitive year in and year out. But still, that's not like, as you said, you're not adding the lower echelon. You're adding some really difficult opponents, especially going out there. So it's going to be a challenge just to get to the top of the league, once out of every 5 years, as opposed to the teams you've seen, with Mark D'Antonio, especially from about 2010 to 2015, were tremendous and got to the championship and got to the playoff. But I think those seasons are going to be few and far between for a lot of these teams, except for Ohio State, as you said. So
is there any chance that, and obviously for the duration of this media rights deal or whatever, is there any chance that, and nobody's, not since the University of Chicago has anybody left the Big Ten. Has anything gone back? Has anything changed? And I've always thought that once you're in, you're sort of in, and that's why people want to come in. But is there any chance that what's just happened doesn't make people happy, and people are unhappy to the point with the arrangement that in 5 or 6 years there's some talk of something else?
I could see it from the upper end more so than the middle and the back end, because everybody's addicted to the money, and I think that's the key here. That's why everything has happened. So if there was to ever be anything happening, it would be, and my fear was at one point that with the disparity between the East and West divisions, in perception more than reality, but certainly in perception, that at some point Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan in particular would say, you know what, we're making too much. We're dragging everybody else around. We need to kind of break off and have a smaller league and do something that way. And that's something that I fear when you get to leagues of 18 and 16, that eventually at some point schools just decide that they need to do something different and break off, and if they're willing to sacrifice the money, yeah, I think it's possible. But at this point, I think, if anything, the Big Ten solidified itself with these teams in the West Coast, that they're upper middle class, and it'll make a more robust and competitive Big Ten, more financially secure, and I don't see anybody wanting to drop off. I mean, the only time it came kind of close to that was when Penn State joined the league. Northwestern was very fearful that it was going to be booted, and in fact, that's why it was a really tough vote, and it came down to the very, very end, and Northwestern flipped to allow Penn State to join, because there was a kind of an amendment raised that there would be no change to the composition of the Big Ten for at least 3 years, and I think, but I just don't see anything happening like that, at least for a while.
You and I both like hoops, and nobody ever considers basketball when they put these things together. But sometimes basketball works out okay. Like I mean, I love what the Big East did. The new Big 12 is a hoops league. When you add the Arizonas and Utah could have some could be a ferocious league in some ways. And the Big 10 with Oregon and UCLA and USC gets. I mean, those are fun matchups. There's no question about them. I do wonder if the fun matchup that we're going to enjoy for a couple years is going to be less fun after a while, and we would have preferred to get a home and home against Indiana or Purdue, or just play somebody again like we used to do in some of the matchups in towns that we're accustomed to. But basketball, you got to think, right? It's going to be almost just a one play all the way through. If they stick at 20 games, and you got 18 teams, you're playing 3 teams a second time, and that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah, and I wonder how that's going to work. I think, especially with the West Coast and the weather patterns of where we live at that time of year, and can you imagine that if there's a snowstorm in Lansing and you're trying to get to Eugene, Oregon, or Seattle, or even Rutgers, it's tough enough. I think that was the case last year, if I remember correctly. That it was tough to get a makeup game there. So I wonder, if something creative needs to happen to make it a little bit more fun, because I am totally with you. I mean, tradition is paramount in that sport, and there's nothing like the home and homes that of yesteryear in Big Ten basketball. I wonder if there would be something smarter where it's a single play with everybody, one double play. So Michigan and Michigan State play twice every year, and that would be it. And then with the Big Ten tournament, something that I've been thinking about. It's just a stupid idea that I have, but maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of say 3 or 4 tournament sites the weekend before the Big Ten tournament. So there's 4 or 5 or even 6 teams at a campus site, and they play over the weekend. And then, you get, maybe you have teams that have buys, or there's 3 or 4 that advance no matter what. But that way you get your 20 games in, and then you shrink the actual Big Ten tournament to maybe 8 teams overall instead of trying to fit 18 over, 5 or 6 days. And so, I think something creative like that might be helpful. And because, there's nothing that nobody's going to want that Wednesday night in Eugene, Oregon. I just can't imagine. Even Nebraska, was going to say, we got to go all the way out there. I mean, you pay lip service to the schools and stuff like that. But I do think it'll be better, though, for some of the other sports, the Olympic ones, because there was such consternation over how do you get out to L.A. and then all those schools trying to crisscross the country, that now maybe in the spring they can play more softball and baseball out there and have more protected foes, and then limit your trips across the country.
No, and I think, frankly, the schools, I mean, places like, Michigan State, where they, an entire softball season's either in a flooded field or in snow, they wouldn't mind, playing like a tournament where you're playing a bunch of conference games, not really a tournament, but just round robins on UCLA and USC's fields. People would love that in March. Nobody wants to be in East Lansing in March swinging a baseball bat. And so maybe there's some possibilities of ways to play some conference games where the sport's actually enjoyable and some of those. And I do think you're going to have to be willing to charter and make sure. I mean, one of the things that I think people need to hold the Big Ten's feet to the fan here, if that's the phrase on whatever, is taking care of student athletes. You're getting paid a lot of money to do this. So when you're, and the volleyball teams usually charter and things like that, but everybody who's going across the country in the middle of the week needs to be on a charter, and how that affects their classes, and maybe coming back the next morning instead of overnight. And there needs to be a lot of care taken, even if it's more expensive, because you're doing this to get paid. No question.
And I think that some of this is easy that they've never had to consider before. They've kind of ran each sport like their own little fiefdom, and they're never really worried about everything else. Well, now if you have, in the fall, volleyball and women's soccer, and you're going out to Los Angeles and you're Michigan State, okay, well, maybe you play, each team plays twice, and they share the same charter when they go out there. So they're playing UCLA on a Thursday and USC on a Saturday, or vice versa, and maybe somebody else does that as well. I think you bring up a great point of just being more accommodating for these athletes. And then I also think in some of the Olympic sports that they make it too difficult. That why not have a double duel at some of these places? Now Iowa might be unique because they sell them all out, and that's an actual revenue source. But for places where you get a couple hundred fans on a Friday or a Saturday, it's like, well, why don't you have the 2 Michigans and 2 Indiana schools all meet and wrestle each other twice in one day and once the next day at one location? So that way you're just saving, costs and travel concerns and everything. I think more care needs to be done to that, even with women's and men's basketball, that sometimes I think doubling up these games will be more helpful for the overall schools, rather than, have Iowa fly to Rutgers for a men's game, and then the Rutgers women fly to Iowa City the same night. I mean, it just, in some ways, it just doesn't make sense. They really need to start analyzing the way these things are going, because they need to save these sports and have better attention on their student athletes.
Before I let you go, your predictions for the Big Ten championship game this year, as it stands, the final Big Ten of 14 teams, what is it?
Yeah, I guess I got to go with Michigan out of the East, and I think this is the first time I can remember that Michigan is legitimately the favorite. It's even like last year. It's like, well, Ohio State's going to bounce back. No, I actually think that they've got a chance. It depends on what happens at the quarterback at Ohio State, and I think Marvin Harrison's the best player in the league. But I would go with the Wolverines, and I'm going to go with Iowa. I think Wisconsin has potential to get there, but they've got so many new faces and so many new designs and changes on offense. It's really hard for me to get my arms around that they're going to go spread rather than the power O that they've ran for 30 years and be successful immediately doing it. Whereas Iowa, its offense was putrid last year. We all know that. But, going out and getting 6 players that'll probably start, in the transfer portal might put them in a position to where they can move the ball, and they should have a pretty good defense. So I'm going to go with Iowa and Michigan, and I will go with the Wolverines three-peating and getting to the playoff and maybe even winning it.
Well, Scott, I'm glad that Michigan State is headed that way. Kinnick Stadium is one of my favorite venues to visit, and that will be pretty much the 10-year anniversary of the time Michigan State went out there, and when nobody thought anything was great was happening with the program. They put together a great game, and a few weeks later, a couple months later, they were in the Big Ten championship game and then the Rose Bowl. And so we'll see if maybe that starts for Michigan State, the improbable run. I would bet my life not. But anyway.
I remember it well, and that was probably the best defense I've seen in the Big Ten. Even better than the 16 Michigan team. And they were trailing at halftime and came back, and Connor Cook kind of had his coming out party, and the defense was lights out, no question.
Scott, I appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you in a couple months.
All right. Same, Graham. Take care.
That's Scott Docterman from The Athletic. You can read his work there. Does an awesome job. Always enjoyed chatting with him. Some interesting stuff. We will talk about that after our interview with Mike, and we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, Mike Vorel from the Seattle Times on the Pac-12 or Pac-4 or West Coast perspective on everything that's going on here. Couch in the Rube, presented by our friends at Front 43 and Cask & Company.
Wherever you are on your cannabis journey, let Sky Mint Premium Cannabis be your guide, your friend, and your place. Whether you're curious about cannabis or a seasoned connoisseur, Sky Mint's knowledgeable staff will help you with a vast selection of products to choose from to fit your needs. Sky Mint believes access to the best cannabis helps people do good and feel good, so they grow it right here in Michigan, giving you high-quality, locally grown cannabis at highly accessible prices. Visit skymint.com for special offers and location information throughout Michigan, and use the promo code CouchAndRube20 for 20% off your first visit. Sky Mint Cannabis. You'll love this place. Firekeepers Online Casino and Sportsbook is the site to play. Get your Vegas on right now from your phone, tablet, or laptop. All the hottest slots and tables, plus sports betting featuring in-game wagering. Go with the name you know. Firekeepers. Get your first casino deposit and sports wager matched up to $500 each. Visit firekeeperscasino.com to download the mobile app today. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older and located in Michigan. Gambling problem? Call the Michigan Problem Gambling Helpline at 1-800-270-7117. Come enjoy irresistible, award-winning, handcrafted donuts and locally roasted coffee at Groovy Donuts. Surprise your family or coworkers with special holiday designs and flavors, or put the perfect finishing touch on an event with a custom order. Birthdays, weddings, gender reveals, our friends at Groovy Donuts are your answer. Experience the Groovy Donuts difference for yourself on Lake Lansing Road in East Lansing or in Williamston. Get more information or place an order at groovydonuts.com.
Find our live stream, podcast archives, as well as show, affiliate, and sponsorship information at our website, spotlightmediastudios.com.
Couch in the Rube, our Wednesday night show presented by our friends at Front 43 Neighborhood Pub and Cask & Company Kitchen and Bar near the Lansing, East Lansing border. Go to caskandcompany.com, check out their menu and outstanding drink selection. Pleased now to be joined by Mike Vorel from the Seattle Times. Covers, is it Vorel or Vorel? Did I get that wrong?
It's Vorel, but that's okay.
God damn it! All right, that's I was practicing, and then I realized I probably had it wrong. It is good to talk to you again. We talked last year before Michigan State played out there, and while some things have happened, and now it looks like it's looking forward to seeing you again this year, this time in East Lansing, and now it looks like we'll see a lot more of each other. What was your initial thought as the news started to break on this?
Yeah, I think it just, from a Washington perspective, it's just a feeling of, finality, and that's something that they've been searching for so long. It's the rumors have been swirling for more than a year. I mean, ever since USC and UCLA announced that they're going to the Big Ten, I think from a Washington perspective, the feeling was that was where the Huskies needed to be eventually. We all know where this is going in college football in terms of the Big Ten getting bigger, the SEC getting bigger. I think Washington saw themselves as one of those schools, and as much as there was a loyalty to the Pac-12, and there are some unsure feelings from the fan base at this point, I think a lot of people understood that to be able to continue to compete for national championships, to have that level of exposure, to be able to recruit nationally, the Big Ten was where they wanted to be. So there's some relief, there's some happiness, there's some uncertainty about regional rivalries and all of that. There's a swirl of emotions, but I think from my perspective, I think I'm certainly happy that it's over, and I think a lot of people are happy just to know where the Huskies are going as well.
So in some ways, what happened with USC and UCLA gave people a year to process the possibility of it, correct?
I mean, no question. I think prior to USC and UCLA leaving, I wonder if some people, I don't think that there were a lot of people here who thought it was even possible that something like that might occur. I mean, the Pac-12 has survived for 108 years with a number of different names, but Washington's always been there. They were a charter member. They were a founding member. And West Coast football has always existed in the Pac-12 conference. So for USC and UCLA to make that move, I think that was a step that said, okay, this is something that might happen. And also for Washington fans to begin to think, okay, this is something that Washington should pursue to maintain their viability long term in doing what they want to do, which is to win conference championships and to be able to compete for national championships.
The rest. I mean, there are parts of the Pac-12 that are decimated by this, in Washington State being one, Oregon State being the other, and obviously, Washington State's a different fan base, a different side of the state, all that stuff. What's happening to that rivalry and what's happening to them matter to, do you think, Washington faithful and the people around there?
Yeah, I mean, that's so much of the conversation right now, and I do think it's a big rivalry here. It's something that the state is built around, and so from one perspective, Washington fans don't want to be protective of Washington State or Washington State fans. There's certainly some feeling of good riddance, but also this is a rivalry in the Apple Cup where people in the state of Washington grew up watching these games, grew up going to these games with their parents or their mom or their dad, or there's alums where it's split between families, and it's been part of life in the state of Washington. So I think it's a tremendously sad thing for those fan bases and those schools to be split apart. Now, there's no reason that they can't keep playing the game from a non-conference perspective, but I know that there's a lot of hurt feelings right now too. So it's one of those situations where if they want to play it, they'll play it. But especially from Washington State's side, I think everyone has to come to terms with the reality of what's happened and see if they can move forward.
So, from a Washington perspective, coming to the Big Ten, in this particular Big Ten, where three of the other top teams in the Pac-12 are with them, and then the best of the Big Ten is already there. It doesn't help. This isn't like help them succeed in certain ways, if you know what I mean. Like on the field, this doesn't help Washington get back to the playoff and things like that. Is there you talk about an understanding of this is where they need to be for security. Is there a little bit of a pull, like, I don't know if this is the best thing for us football-wise?
Well, I think it's an interesting conversation, right? Because, yeah, there is a more direct route to the playoff, in the Pac-12. There's no doubt about that. In whatever the next iteration of the playoff was, what had been agreed upon was that the top 6 conference champions go to the playoff. So Washington could get there easier in the Pac-12 undoubtedly than being in the Big Ten. But at the same time, if you're signing a grant of rights that gives you $25 million a year and you're hoping to play against and beat teams that are getting 50 to 60 to 70 million a year, how realistic is that to occur? So the idea is not just to get to the playoff. It's not just to get to the dance. It's to give yourself a future where you can win those games, where you can have a ceiling beyond that. And I just feel like Washington ultimately thought with what the proposal was from the Pac-12 that they wouldn't be able to keep pace with the Big Ten teams and the SEC teams. They need a certain level of revenue and stability to be able to see a future beyond, we hope we make it, and then that's good enough for us.
I've seen a few comments from student athletes, some not thrilled about this isn't what they signed up for, and for anybody who's already on campus, this of course isn't what you signed up for. Is there much talk, because obviously with 4 of the former Pac-12 schools, there's a little bit more of an ability to have protected rivalries among them and to keep some of the time zone travel somewhat where those games are a preference. But how much talk is there about just the weight of the travel? Because a lot of the burden is going to be on the schools that are out there to make the trips.
Yeah, I mean it's a big deal. I know that I've seen some of those reports too in terms of softball players from Oregon or Arizona State. I don't think anyone from Washington has made a public comment about the move, but certainly it's a strain on. More so, football will be fine. Football has the money. Football doesn't travel as much. Football can figure it out going anywhere. But for softball, for volleyball, for those sports, it's not as easy. There's more of a time demand there, and it's going to be a hard thing to figure. And I know for Washington is the same thing as what USC said and what UCLA said. It said, okay, we're going to have the resources to make this work. And knowing that you have the resources going forward and that you're in the Big Ten and that you're a part the next media rights deal in 2030, there'll be a full member and you'll get 70 to 80 million probably annually. It's something where Washington's athletic director can say to a softball player or a volleyball player, this is going to be hard for you, but we're going to be able to ensure that we have a softball program 20 years from now, that we have a volleyball program 20 years from now. They're talking about being able to ensure that they get to keep those sports. And in a lot of places where you don't have that revenue, it's being harder and harder to make that math work.
The men's basketball side of this at Washington, I know they haven't lately had as many good teams. What's the vibe there?
I mean, the vibe it's interesting because like you mentioned, with Mike Hopkins as the head coach, he had a tremendous first 2 seasons. Then things went really downhill, and I feel like they're in a bit of a bind in that a lot of people want Mike Hopkins fired, but he has a buyout number that I just think hasn't been realistic for UW to kind of cut the cord there. So they're kind of going year to year and seeing if they can turn this around. And I think you go into a Big Ten that is a very, very competitive league. And obviously there's no shortage of contenders in that league as well. So I think it's an uphill climb. Of course, there is the same kind of hope that arises from, okay, we can recruit nationally, we can recruit the East Coast, we can recruit the Midwest, we can brand ourselves as that kind of program. And Washington does have a very proud history in basketball, but it's just hard to see the path forward right now with Mike Hopkins as head coach. So we're going to see if he makes it to the Big Ten a year from now, but it's kind of a little bit more tenuous, I would say, on the basketball side.
I look forward to the Big Ten tournament the year it's in Seattle, and I think it will be. I mean, I do think one thing the Big Ten has done, and I don't know what the Big Ten tournament will look like, but it's in Minnesota this year. They moved it around a little bit. There was in D.C., it was in New York. I think there will be a Portland or Seattle Big Ten tournament. Want to ask you a little bit about Washington, because you'll be out here in about a month and a half, less than that, a month and a week, for the Michigan State-Washington game. And there are a lot of high hopes with Washington this year. And I think Michigan State fans see that as a barometer game. Like they know what that game looked like last year. It was not pretty, and they'll get a good sense of their own team. What is similar and what is different about Washington this year from a year ago?
Well, the bad news for Michigan State fans is there's an awful lot that's similar in terms of personnel. When you've got essentially their entire offense back, they're replacing a couple linemen, which is a question mark, but I think they feel confident about what they've done there. But outside of that, really their skill players are the same. Michael Penix is still there. Roma Dunze, Jalen McMillan, their wide receivers are there. They added a running back from Mississippi State, Dylan Johnson, and they've got a couple other returners. Their tight ends are all back. A bunch of their defensive playmakers are back. We can talk about the pass rushers and Braylon Trice and Zion Tupuola-Fatui, Edefanu Lafocio, their linebacker. They've got a lot of pieces. The place that they're trying to improve is their secondary, which their pass defense was atrocious last year. They had a ton of cornerback injuries. They've brought in a transfer in Jabbar Muhammad from Oklahoma State. They've got a JUCO that they've got some young players they're excited about. So really the question for them is, have they improved the secondary? But in terms of that offense, it is really intact, and it's hoping to achieve even more than it did a year ago.
Well, and Michael Penix's 30th birthday is right around that game. From what I always think about watching him as a young player at Indiana in the Mark D'Antonio era at Michigan State pre-pandemic. Anybody who was around pre-pandemic, tearing it up in college football has been around a while at this point. Well, Mike, I appreciate the time, man, and look forward to seeing you. And I hope this storyline dies down for you for a little while.
Thanks. See you soon.
Sounds good. That is Mike Vorel. Got the name right there, Mike Vorel from the Seattle Times. I even wrote it right phonetically. I wrote Mike Vor-L, and then I went Vorel, like the dipshit that I am, because I suck at this.
It happens.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. Any takeaways from those conversations, Jason?
I took away from the Scott Dockerman conversation that hold your kids' feet to the fan. Is that like a new term?
The fire, something.
It's fine. I just wanted to make sure. I didn't know if it was like a newfangled thing.
No, it's not. It's not. Don't. Yeah, most of my phrases are not newfangled things.
And how many times will you use the Michael Penix joke? The week of the Washington game. How many times we talked?
I thought about it during this conversation. I was like, it'll at least go into my when I do that column where I predict the whole season. It'll be in that.
Okay.
It'll definitely be in the week of the game. So
there's 2, and
then tonight. So minimum 3, 2 in writing, at least 1 now.
I'm taking the over.
You're taking the over.
Going heavy.
Yeah, likely so. It is amazing though, because I remember him lighting up Michigan State in like 2019, and that is a long time ago now, and I know there are other guys in college football been around pre-pandemic and the extra year and all that stuff, but the guy has been around a little bit. That is, I don't think it's great news for Michigan State that Washington's got such high expectations, but there are a couple games before that. Michigan State can deal with that problem when it actually arises. We appreciate Mike and Scott joining us. I hope you enjoyed those conversations, give you a feel for what's happening. We appreciate Front 43 and Cask & Company. Great place to take a friend. I take my softball and soccer teams there just about every week. Give it a shot if you never have. Many of you have. You know how we feel about our original sponsor. We'll be back, I think, Friday afternoon is the plan with a Groovy Donut Twitter question show. Good show, man.
Yeah, man.
Couch in the Roof.